Welcome to my talk on maps of Westeros. I intend to look at how Westeros was covered by cartographers before the Ordnance Survey came to the area in 1875, and also how names for places have changed over this period. I don't intend to spend a great deal of time talking about the cartographers themselves, other than to give a little background. Most of these maps can be found on the excellent website of the National Library of Scotland. The rest come from the British Library's collection. I've spent some time examining all the maps on the National Library's website from 1500 to 1807, some 276 maps at the time. This was to identify those that were of significance. I could just have read studies done on this, but I was interested in the longevity of some maps and how they were copied by others. This could only be determined by viewing all the maps, tedious though this could be. Some maps, or derivatives of them, were copied for a considerable period despite other maps having been produced in the meantime. As an example, by my reckoning, Mercator's map of 1595 was still being used as the basis of a map in 1734, 139 years after its first publication. This slide shows complete images of 3 early maps extending over the British Isles and one of just Scotland. For ease of comparison, all of the maps are shown with north at the top. The main point to note from these less than clear images is how relatively well drawn are England and Wales compared to Scotland, especially the northwest of Scotland. We'll look at each of these in turn next. Before moving on, note the orientation of Scotland on the left-hand map, turned at right angles. In the following slides, I indicate the cartographer and the date of the map at the top, with its title below, and in the bottom left, I have shown the direction of north. This is a 16th century copy of a map based on Ptolemy's work. Ptolemy was a Greek academic living around 100 Common Era, or AD 100 if you prefer. He was not a cartographer and may not even have drawn maps. If he did, these have been lost. He assembled geographical coordinates of places known to him, and those maps that exist were probably derived from these data. As we saw in the previous slide, much of Scotland is at right angles to its correct orientation. Ptolemy took information from disparate sources, which were not always consistent. It wouldn't be surprising that the error appeared in the first map drawn from Ptolemy's coordinates, and succeeding maps perpetuated this. It is difficult to see where Westeros is found on this map. This is a later, more detailed version of a map based on Ptolemy. Some of the names have been identified, but any that may be in our area of interest have not. The larger names are names of tribes collected by Ptolemy, but I haven't found anything about them. This map offers little that helps in our understanding of Westeros. In this case, north is to the left. This was common for early maps. They were literally oriented with east at the top. Very little is known about this map. It is only called the Gough map because an antiquarian, Richard Gough, gave the original to the Bodleian Library in 1809. The original has been dated to 1400, with later 15th century reworkings. This image of northern Scotland is from a facsimile produced by the Ordnance Survey and is much easier to read than the original. This facsimile was first published in 1870, with the red transcriptions of ancient names added in the 1935 edition. I've added some labels to the northern section of the previous slide and tried to give an indication of its counties. Comitatus means county, so Caithness, Sutherland, Ross and Murray can be identified, as can some cities. There is an area in West Ross and Sutherland where wolves were said to be found. Other than this, again, there is nothing identifiable in Westeros. We move on to 1546 and a map drawn by George Lilly. He probably drew this in Rome from information provided by priests. Once again, we are still lacking anything of value in a study of Westeros. Not too many insights so far. It is easy to be critical of these early maps. They were not drawn to be used for navigation on land or sea, but as a guide to those wishing to know the locations of places, and because of the cartographer's profession, often those of ecclesiastical importance. While to our eyes, northern Scotland was crudely drawn, to someone in Rome, just knowing the approximate location of Iona was of value. Here we see Iona larger than its less important neighbour Mull. This map comes from Gerard Mercator. It was published 5 years before he published a world map using his now famous prediction, for which he is best known. A draft of the map here was given to him by an unknown friend. Mercator thought it so good that he engraved it as it was. The Scottish part of the map may have come from the work of John Elder from Caithness, who travelled to various parts of the country. Elder was a tutor to Lord Darnley, presented a map of Scotland to Henry VIII, and possibly supplied the place names that we see here. We have a few names in Westeros. This map appears to be the first to show these. In what follows, I shall be referring to many places in Westeros. To keep the talk moving, I shall assume that my audience has a basic knowledge of the geography of the area. I rotated Mercator's map to show north to the top and matched it with a modern outline of the coast. The main lochs can easily be identified. Neither Loch Broom nor Little Loch Broom is named, but we do see Loch Drum, which may relate to Loch Droma on the Geary. This loch would have been important if travelling from the east, maybe to visit the church at Clachan, at the head of Loch Broom. Perhaps this is what stone represents. Stone in Gaelic is clach. As you may know, both the Sea Loch and Loch Marie were known as Loch Ewe, hence Loch Ewe. But as early as about 1600, Pont, who we'll hear about later, stated that it was by some called Loch Mulroy. This explains all the islands in Loch Ewe on this map, when there is only one of any significance, Alliu, in the Loch Ewe that we know. Churches were prominent on many early maps, often because information was gathered by the clergy. I've not seen a study of the symbols that appear on this map, and I don't know of a key for it. They are possibly inserted in places for artistic purposes. For example, have a look at the left-hand extract on this slide. In Sutherland, admittedly out with our area, Durness seems to have a large cathedral, while Laxford appears with a symbol suggesting a church, but there is no evidence that they ever had these. Turning to the main map here, on the coast, there is Balnoheclish, clearly from Gaelic Balnoheclish, which is Kirkton in Scots. I wonder if this is the Kirkton on Londu of Beaulieu, with its circular medieval graveyard and chapel. It's a little displaced in location, shown opposite Grunzo or Grignard Island, but well within the margins of error for a map of this date. Another possibility is the chapel at Lade, but I haven't seen any reference to it as Ballinaheclish or the like. South of Loch Ewe and Loch Marie, we have Yillerton, which would appear to be on the peninsula between Loch Ewe and Loch Gairloch. We'll see it repeated in a variety of forms, but what it represents is a mystery to me. Maybe someone in the audience can offer a suggestion. Before I move inland, I'll just mention Burnt Island that I have highlighted opposite Loch Carron. Again, I don't know to what this refers, but Anchilan Loch was not an unknown name. One exists on Loch Marie, for example. Inland along Loch Marie, we have Ferris. It is documented that Sir George Hay came to Loch Marie in 1607, and commenced an ironworks at letter U, or more specifically, furnace. It is thought that ironworking had been carried out before this date, so this may explain why the name of a place of such economic importance in the area appeared on the early maps. It may be that what we have here is an attempt at the Gaelic taken from English for furnace. There is another possibility, and we'll look at that later. The associated symbol seems to show a church, so unless this is not furnace, this would be another dubious symbol. Before we leave this map, I have another query for you. The second label down on the right-hand side is Loch Kesher. Does anyone have any ideas what this may be? The date of this map is uncertain, but was drawn by Lawrence Noel, who was an English antiquarian, cartographer, and pioneering scholar of the Old English language and literature. This map is surprisingly accurate for its time, with only small latitudinal and longitudinal errors. It includes a large number of place names, but little in Westeros that we have not come across already. Loch Bryn is shown. The name Loch Broom comes from Loch Vryn, referring to rain or similar. Bryn is therefore a good rendition of the Gaelic. Assynt is labelled, but Coigach has been incorrectly displaced to the south of Loch Marie, where it remained on maps for much of the 16th century. This map, like the one just seen, has north to the right and is a backward step in terms of accuracy. Before we are too harsh in judging it, it is worth noting that many early maps were drawn from descriptions of the land. Try writing down the layout of the sea lochs of Westeros with their associated settlements and have someone draw a map from it. And do it without the benefit of seeing maps of the area beforehand. Bishop John Leslie was Bishop of Ross in 1566, but this didn't seem to help him in adding detail to a copy of Lily's map. Clearly, Leslie was not aware of the maps by Mercator or Noel, as he was, like Lily, working in Rome when he drew his map. In the east, shown in the white ellipse, he indicated Dornoch, Tain, Dingwall, and the Shannonry of Ross. That's Fort Rose. We do have a few names in the west, but these are somewhat confused. From the north, beyond our area of interest, there is Laxford, which keeps cropping up. Next, there's Kintail, which appears to be too far north, but it may be a settlement. I don't know of a Kintail in Sutherland. It comes from Gaelic Cianantal, the head of the seawater. Less well known than the Kintail around Loch Dewey is Cianantal in Gairloch. That's not a name that I have ever heard in English. Another detail of the Westeros part of the map. Again, Loch Bruna is fine, being near to the original form of Loch Broom just mentioned. Along the coast is Dunstaffaire, for which I can only think of Dunstafnage near Oban. That's Dunstahanish in Gaelic, but it's miles out of place. One of my daughters lives less than a mile from Dunstafnage Castle, and I may not have made the connection otherwise. Inner Loch Ewe labelling a loch could represent Inverloch Ewe, which would not be a loch. To think of it as Inner Loch Ewe would be an English speaker's take on it, but, compared to the spelling of Inverness, unlikely. All interesting and possibly deserving of further study. From what I can find, no one has examined these names in detail. Nicholas de Nicolay's chart, rather than a map, was engraved and published in Paris and was superior to anything that had come before or was to be produced in the 16th century. It was based on a much earlier manuscript map and may have preceded Lily's map of 1546. This chart is based on a rutter, a pilot's guide, which was a set of accurate distances and directions gained from first-hand marine observation. The rutter of the Scottish coast was produced by Alexander Lindsay for the voyage of King James V around the coast in 1540. Lewis, Ross and Kintail were visited on this voyage. The chart we see here was, then, based on a detailed measured survey. We see a repeat of some of the names from earlier maps, some odd ones, and possibly the first appearance of Strome with its castle in the south of this extract. We have again the mysterious Yillerton, but as Willerton. We return to Mercator, whose atlas, including the British Isles, was published a year after his death. There are two maps including Westeros, one in colour of the whole of Scotland and one in black and white of northern Scotland. There are differences between these, with some names omitted from the map of Scotland and some differences of those included on both. In Westeros, for example, Eilean Grinchor here is shown as Grinchard Eilean on the other version. Yillerton on his 1564 map is now Allerton. Note also how district names are now found on this map, with Coigach in the same incorrect position too far south as on Noel's map. The detail of the black and white version of Mercator's map, there are several names that we are familiar with highlighted here. This leaves the remainder of the names. There are additional names added to all areas of northern Scotland when compared with the 1564 map. In Westeros, a striking feature of the extra names is that most are of 4 of 5 letters: Mera, Zoots, Brew, Score, Kulk, and Dunra, amongst others. These are all a little suspect. The names of many settlements in the area are known from a 1566 document confirming the heir to Gairloch lands. Those on the 1595 map do not suggest any similarity with these. Tor, next to what is believed to be Loch Torridon, may just be a coincidence. Loam, at the south-east end of Loch Maree, lies where Kinlochhew stands today. The name Kinlochhew, Kenlochhew in Gaelic and spelled as Kenlochhew in early documents, appears to be very old, possibly dating back to the 14th century. Again, it must be wondered where Loam came from. Loch Torridon is called Loch Resart by Mercator. Could this be a contraction of Torridon in Gaelic, with only the middle part captured, Tudderhurton? Lastly, there is Loch Gar, indicated as an inland loch, extending from the sea loch, Loch Ewe. The name may also be a coincidence, but it may come from Gairloch. There are lochs a short distance from the shore of Loch Ewe, to which this may be applied, with one contender being Loch Squad. It is possible that John Elder from Caithness, whom I mentioned earlier, may have contributed names to Mercator, or the names came from another, possibly written source, but it has not been possible to determine what this could be. It is clear, however, that some of the names may have been unwittingly added by Mercator from what he believed was a reliable source. There is an improvement in the representation of the sea lochs with Mercator's 1564 map, and they are very close to those of Noel and Nicolay, showing the sharing or copying of material. We now come to Timothy Pont, the first person to carry out a survey of Scotland in person. He did not publish any maps, but his material was used by Blaw, who produced an atlas of Scotland in 1654. Many of Pont's maps have been lost, and the one for Westeros does not progress beyond a first draft. Robert Gordon Straloch, however, played a large part in redrawing Pont's maps and aiding Blaw in producing his atlas. This Robert Gordon was the grandfather of the founder of what we now call Robert Gordon University. I show on this slide an extract from what is classified as Pont 4, the only one that has survived to cover our area. It has the unfortunate title, The Backside of Ross, and is made up of several maps making good use of the sheet of paper. On its backside is a map of Assynt. As we'll see, It is unlikely to have been the only map of the area that Pont produced. You may recognise some names highlighted in black on this map. Loch Gryniard in the top left and on its side, Sand, Drumachork, also on the left. In the middle, Loch na Shalog, above which is Ancheloch. The name has been read as Ptolemy, but the P may be a poorly written B, so it possibly represents Ben Talloch Essie. This interestingly links Ancheloch's name to the waterfalls that come down to Ardesi on the shore of Little Loch Broom. Pont gives us an otherwise lost name, Leichet Essie, the hillside of the waterfall stream, for the northern slope of Ancheloch. This is but one example of the many place names that would have been lost had Pont not recorded them. This map may not look too precise, but having been drawn without the benefit of triangulation or measurement by instrument, it is a marvellous achievement. The top of this slide shows another part of the same map by Pont, this time of Gairloch, which extends east from Inverlal, near the head of Loch Broom. The lower part shown here is the OS map of the same glen. On the OS map, I've added in blue the watercourses that Pont drew on his map above. I've scaled Pont's map so that the distance between Balblair, bottom right, and Esfian, in the middle, is the same as the OS map. These are indicated by the two thick parallel lines. If Pont's map was completely accurate, then all the lines would be parallel. What you can see is that this is not the case, but especially considering the rugged nature of the valley and the technique used, he has not done badly. The amazing thing is the effort that he went to map this valley. At the time he passed through, it was of much more significance than it is today. You may have seen the programme from 2020 about its archaeology, entitled Gilip Nambiaun, the Legacy of the Mountains. I was sceptical that some of the places indicated on Pont's map were actually settlements until I heard about the 260 people who lived there in the past. Without Pont, many of these settlement names would be unknown. This is another part of Pont 4, and even nearer to Gairloch Museum. At the bottom are the islands of Loch Marie. These, and the names in particular, were analysed by our own Roy Wentworth for his contribution to a book on Pont's maps. This revealed a great deal about the Gairloch of the 17th century and the names given to the islands at that time. It wasn't until the OS surveyed the islands that a map of this detail was again produced. Above the islands on this page of Pont's work is a sketch of the Torridon Hills. These two sketches have been seen as separate, but I see them as one, viewed, as Roy Wentworth realised, from Aienalan, above letter U. The mountains have largely been identified, with a couple of exceptions. Another aspect that has not been explained was the line through the sketch. I've spent some time looking at the unidentified hills and the line across the map, and believe that I've solved the puzzles. My theory is that Pont added hatching to the base of hills that were adjacent to lochs. I've still to find an example on early draft maps by Pont that disprove this idea. You will see them at the base of what represents Benet and Benicherkel. It is also at the base of the mystery hill, Ben Ur Chuddy. I pronounced the V, or is it a Y, as a U, as this would roughly be how it had been used at the time. Pont drew the Loch Marie Islands at the edge of his paper. I think that he wanted to show Benalichar, but didn't have the space, so he added it in a spare space and indicated that it was next to a loch by adding hatching. I'll spare you my working of how the name on Pont could be the modern name of the hill. Another hill, about which was doubt, is the one named Guishvin. Looking at this phonetically, and from its location, this must be Bershvin. The other matter to be tackled is the line running through the Torridon Hills, highlighted in red here. I think this was drawn to indicate how Pont travelled from Glen Torridon. If this line had been added to a completed sketch of the hills, it would have appeared jerky as it was drawn tentatively to position it correctly. My thought is that this line was drawn first. Pont then added the hills to show his route, ending on Eilean Ruaidhrí Bic, where he probably took advantage of the hospitality of John Roy Mackenzie, Laird of Gairloch from 1566 to 1628, at his house on the island. The Laird could also have provided a boat to take Pont across Loch Maree. This slide shows the most obvious route from Glen Torridon to the shore of Loch Maree opposite Eilean Ruaidhrí Bic. This matches the line drawn on this sketch. This is all that exists of Pont's maps of the Gairloch coast south of Rouré, but it is probable that he did survey this in detail because it appears on maps most probably derived from his work. There is also mention of the area in his texts, which complement his maps and were commonly used at the time along with mapping. Analysis of the handwriting has revealed that Robert Gordon added detail to this, as he did to other maps by Pont. Robert Gordon, you will recall, redrew Pont's maps and worked with Blaeu on that man's atlas. The similarities of this map by Gordon to that of Pont are clear when you look at the top of this map. There is not much detail for the area between Grignard and Loch. A later version, however, is quite a contrast, giving us the first existing detailed naming of settlements for Gairloch parish. The whole map covers much of northern Scotland and is about half a metre wide, but still the scale is too small to allow all of Pont's Loch Maree Islands and the nearby hills to be named. Here is an enlargement of the Gairloch area. You'll see familiar names from Gairloch parish, albeit with different spellings. Looking at the coast from north to south, I've underlined in white Sand, Udrigal, Budfern, Dermachor, Tourneg, Inverew, Inverin, Tolly, Nast, Inverasdale, Melvig, Sand, Longa, North Airedale, Meal, Achtercairn, Gairloch Church, Shieldig, Badachrow, South Airedale, Gearbeck. You'll recognise others inland. The lochs and headlands will also be familiar. You may have noticed that I missed out some names. Roy McIlvandrich was thought by Dixon to be named after a headland near Boor. Utrell is used in the Gairloch estate rental records until its final appearance in 1770. From the records, it is clear that this is an older name for Smithston, which gradually replaces it. Smithston is not a name heard locally, but the Gaelic form from which it came, Ballinagowan, was well used in the past. Utrell was spelt in various ways and would suggest a name of Norse origin, of which we have a number in the area. Knockintole is a mystery and requires more investigation. Note for now Ingadill, to which I shall return. Sandachara appears on a document from 1538, and Dixon thought it to be the Big Sand. But with the benefit of the map, it seems more likely that it is an old name for Red Point. Inland are more familiar names, some of which appeared on Pont's maps or sketches as we saw earlier. In the ellipse, Furness now appears as Fowles. This is thought to come from an old stream name and is probably the Furus that we saw earlier on Mercator's map. This map comes from Blau's Atlas of Scotland. He credits Robert Gordon with collection and description, the latter being the texts that formed an important part of the atlas. You will notice that this is an accurate copy of the map we looked at previously, but in colour. This map was published and is regularly cited as a source, but as we have seen, it was Gordon, and most probably Pont before him, who was the true source. It was over 100 years before another survey of Scotland was conducted. James Dorrit is somewhat of a mystery. He was employed by the 3rd Duke of Argyll as his valet, and called himself a land surveyor, despite only 3 maps of Scotland being known to have been his work. The Duke used his connections to have this 1750 map checked by land proprietors. It is also thought that those working on the military survey of Scotland at the time were consulted. We'll look at the military survey later, but in the meantime, I'll just say that I cannot see any connection linking it to Dorrit's map in Wester Ross. Looking at just a few names on Dorrit's map, we see towards the top 2 Inverasdales. This must have been a drafting error, but the more northerly version is close in spelling to the original name for Inverasdale, Gaelic Inver, mouth of the river, with Norse Aspendale. Note also the red line nearby highlighting Gimps for, possibly, Cove. I don't know where Gimps came from. It bears no resemblance to Gaelic and Uigi or the English name. Gimps is to be seen on many succeeding maps. Within the ellipse, there is a reasonable spelling for Ahageastal, a curious Fluchendale for Flowerdale, Dalmore, an error for Ballamore, the Gaelic for settlement in Flowerdale, and we also have Rary Bay, another error for Kerry Bay. Towards the bottom of the extract are 2 interesting names, Ben Hatch, possibly, and Ben Noir. I think Ben Noir is probably another error for Benignon, next to Benacherkel. I'll leave you to think about Ben Hatch. The obvious may be eluding me. From this, we have to be cautious of anything written on Dorrit's map. These are 2 further details from his map. I've again highlighted a few names on these. The question when looking at these is whether they are accurate representations of names used at the time or corruptions created for an English-speaking audience. On the left map, Sleoch is called Spire Hill, and to its south we have a number of names around Kinlochew in the ellipse. The change house there is named, and some places are familiar, such as Targan and Insherrill. Others are less clear and deserve thought. On the second map of what I've called the Udrigal Peninsula, there is Opens Point and Opens Bay, not recorded anywhere else that I know. They reference the nearby settlement of Openen. Fluchart, next to MVU, is an interesting name. It comes from a knoll west of where MVU House is sited and appears to have been adopted as a settlement name. It was next to, or the same as Kinloch or Loch End, 2 other old names for Kinlochew. It is the work of William Roy that we look at next. Roy was born and grew up in Lanarkshire and worked his way up from training as a surveyor to become a Major General in the Royal Engineers. His work led to the establishment of the Ordnance Survey. He produced the map here for the whole of mainland Scotland between 1747 and 1755. It remained the most detailed and accurate map until the OS surveyed the country in the 1800s. William Roy, however, regarded his map as no more than a, quote, magnificent military sketch. This is part of what is termed the fair copy of the map, as opposed to the original protraction, which was the first drawing. On this extract showing the head of Loch Gairloch, there is no sign of Outral or Smithstown, but we do have Balagowan, mentioned earlier. Next to it, where we speak of Lowmore today, is the unexplained Ballyshagan. In the south, east of Shieldig, is Cambusabo. There are ruins to be found in that area above Kerry Bridge, but nothing is known of the name. If it is a Camas or Bay name, it is in an odd location. The names that appear on old maps are often different from those found on estate rental records. In Flowerdale, however, were it not for Roy's military survey, we would not know where some of the places in the rental records were situated. You will see on the main map here that the house we know as Flowerdale House is called Gairloch's House after the laird. Dixon states that the laird, when he built the house in 1738, gave it the name Flowerdale House, so why wasn't it called that on the map? By the way, the name Flowerdale was in use before the current house was built and dates back to 1730 at least, which was only a couple of years after the previous house near the river partly collapsed. The other names that I've added to the main map come from what is the original protraction, the first drawing of the map shown in the bottom right corner. Quite why some names were not copied to the fair copy and others appeared only on the fair copy is not known. We saw Ingedale on Gordon's map earlier, and these Engdale names gives us a clue to its location. What we know as Flowerdale or Glawnavalavoi in Gaelic had the earlier Norse name Ingedal or something similar. The red blobs represent houses, and the dots and short lines are areas of cultivation, but they cannot be taken as precise records of what was found during the survey. The original protraction is in colour, but I don't have a copy of it other than in black and white. Murdoch Mackenzie produced nautical charts for Orkney, the Western Isles, the west coast of Scotland and Ireland. This is part of the one covering our area. On the overside, there are two names, Copacher and Malavigarek. The first may be derived from a name connected to Car Point. The second is equally difficult. You may have noticed other forms of the name on maps shown earlier. It may come from Norse Malafjall, bent grass fell, or grassy dunes fell, with Gaelic Gerek, red, tagged on the end. On the Loch Ewe part of this chart, on the right, we have, north of Mellon, Ruachon and Ruúdgal. Ruúdgal is a name we don't hear with Greenstone Point or Runaclachuania, or some variant, used nowadays. Across the mouth of Loch Ewe, north of Cove, is Ruan Thassan. The spelling is odd, but it's recognisable. In the south, we have interesting names around Pullew. Camas Glass appears to be inaccurately located across the peninsula from where it is known today in Invew Garden. Camas, between Pluchart and Invew, is only shown on this chart and Ainsley's map that we shall see next. John Ainsley's map was a great improvement that drew on Mackenzie and Dorrit, although it is not known from where he drew the coastline of our area. He was not able to make use of Roy's military survey as it was not generally available. The military survey coastline is much superior. This map has a variety of names seen earlier, such as Spire Hill from Dorrit. There is Furness along Loch Maree, and on the River Ewe is Furness, marking the location of what is generally known as the Red Smithy, one of Sir George Hayes' ironworks. Aaron Arrowsmith was asked to extend his mapping of England to include Scotland, where it was found that what existed was not precise enough for surveying road building. Unlike Ainsley, he was fortunate to have access to Roy's military survey for the Highlands. The improvement in the shape of the coastline is clear. There are clear similarities in the names on the military survey, but Arrowsmith mistakenly shifted Rouray to the peninsula to the east, giving that location two names. Just below Rouray on Arrowsmith's map, and underlined in white on this map, is Theolin Open, a name not seen elsewhere, including in the names recorded by William McRobbie. The element Thurlin, meaning beach field, is found around the area, but the best known will be Anurlin or the Phelan, where the Swedish houses in Gairloch are found, and Tynethurlin, Old Bay. Arrowsmith gave an alternative for some places, but I'm not really sure why he bothered, when many differences were small. Melvek, or Milovac, for example, is shown where only the second appears on Roy's map. You'll notice that he conflated Old Grecian and North Airedale. We know from the memoir that Arrowsmith wrote about the compilation of this map that he consulted some 100 maps and plans, so this may explain the variance. Having said that, it is funny that there aren't more variants than the number he gave. Arrowsmith was an incredible cartographer, and it is worth just reading his Wikipedia entry to see the scope of his output. To help you get your head round this extract of Arrowsmith's map, I've added some labels in black at the sides. Don't be confused by Gairloch in the middle. The underlined Gairloch is to the south of Loch na Haiche. I don't know what this is, but have some memory of hearing that there was a meeting place for Gairloch and Torridon people, or that there was a well called Gairloch. I think, though, that the well was in Birchfan and not where Gairloch is shown. It may, of course, just be an error. The parish name does appear nearby. There's another name that I'll point out before moving on. This is highlighted in the centre west of this extract and is to the east of South Airedale. Gunninol Loch comes from Roy's military survey, but doesn't exist today. It had certainly gone by the time the OS surveyed this area in 1875. Somewhere in estate records there may be reference to the digging of a channel to remove the large meander in the river Owen Dayanyala, on which this shallow loch was to be found. You will see an open circle, not quite in the correct place, but marked by a thick red arrow, marking the location of what was a settlement of around 3 houses, the ruins of which are still clearly visible. Finally, some of you may have seen my query about Hector's shooting quarter on the Historic Gairloch Facebook page. The disadvantage of hashering used for the indication of height can be seen here, virtually obscuring the lettering. I have seen no other reference to what was probably a bothy for shooting parties. If the location is shown correctly, it is just outside Gairloch parish. It is worth noting that Hector Mackenzie was Laird of Gairloch at the time. It is surprises like this that turn up from time to time that make these studies so fascinating. Between Arrowsmith's 1807 map and the OS coming to the Gairloch area, there was no new survey completed. On the left of the slide is the Gough map of around 1400. This provided an indication of the location of important places, but was not for navigation or ownership delineation. People didn't travel much in those times. Everyone carried mental maps of their home area, so maps weren't needed. Those who did travel would have depended on landowners' help to guide them, or they took the risk of being attacked. When land was passed on to an heir, a list of places including in the transfer was drawn up. The need for maps increased as land was divided up with the decline in the clan system in the Highlands. The detail and precision of maps then developed to a different level. Land surveyors became important. In our area, Campbell Smith surveyed Gairloch Estate around 1844 to lay out the crofts. Then the Ordnance Survey arrived, producing maps such as that on the right-hand side of this slide. As stated earlier, The OS first surveyed this area in 1875. This year is therefore the 150th anniversary of its work. The maps of the 19th century to the present could be the subject of another talk. Look out. I've concentrated in this talk on the place names on earlier maps and what they can tell us about the settlement in the past. We can see just how far back many of our names go and how others have changed or been replaced over time. The maps that we have viewed have given us clues to the location of places on old documents, such as those granting land or court cases of disputed ground. Look at pages 60 to 63 of Dixon's Gairloch, where old names from documents are listed, and you'll see that these maps locate many of these places. They are a tremendous resource. I thank the National Library of Scotland for maintaining such a valuable online collection of maps and documents. There is a great deal more that could be said about these maps, but I'll spare you by ending my talk now.